Yes, absolutely. It's already happening. And this is the first big natural disaster that has happened in the aftermath of the dismantling of USAID by Donald Trump and his MAGA gang. The previously USAID provided a big chunk of support aid money to Myanmar.
Let's kick off our news hour with the top story, which is running today, and that, of course, is the terrible earthquake which has happened in Myanmar. New figures have just been released and reported that 1,644 people have lost their lives in Myanmar, which hit the very reclusive and isolated state yesterday in that earthquake. The magnitude was 7.7, and it was also felt in neighbouring Thailand, where at least 9 people have been killed following a skyscraper collapse in Bangkok. Now, the military leaders who rule Myanmar, the junta, have issued a rare appeal for international help in the wake of the crisis. Well, joining us now is Michael Bociurkiw, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Michael, who's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and Michael's a former lead spokesperson for UNICEF during the Cyclone Nargis disaster in Myanmar. Michael, welcome to. Sorry for mangling your surname.
No, you did pretty well, and sorry for the background. I'm in an airport right now, but more than happy to share whatever I know with you.
Well, look, you have been out in Myanmar in a sort of disaster situation. What is it like to work with the authorities there, and how unusual is this request for international help?
Yeah, I know the country pretty well. I was first there before the cyclone. I snuck in as an undercover journalist, and then, as you mentioned, as a UNICEF spokesperson for Cyclone Nargis. In one word, it's absolutely horrible regime to work with. During Cyclone Nargis, we had no choice. Unlike today, where the junta controls a very small part of the country, they pretty much controlled most of it. Cyclone Nargis, for context, was concentrated in the southern part of the country. There were about 138,000 dead. Hence, I think these numbers will go way up. And there was something like 2.5 million people impacted.
And when was that, Michael? When was that?
That was in 2008. In 2008, and what happened is, I was part of the UN at the time, and the Myanmar government made it very, very difficult for first responders like the UN to come in. I made it in because I'm Canadian, not American, and each application for a visa had to go from the UN Secretary General to the Myanmar government for vetting. Hence, it took us a long time to get there. But I have to tell you, and I've worked a lot of disasters, 2 weeks in, if not more, I arrived in Myanmar and there was this eerie calm at the airport. No helicopters going back and forth, no pilots of aid. And then what happened around that time, 2 or 3 weeks into the disaster, the United States was offering a whole fleet of ships. They had about 1,000 Marines and several helicopters and, of course, a lot of aid. They waited 3 weeks to come in and the junta said, sorry, you're not allowed in. They left. Same thing happened to a French vessel. So I hope the same thing doesn't happen this time, because we're in this 72-hour crucial window where rescue teams could come in and help save a lot of lives.
And will the authorities favour some countries giving aid more than others? Will they go to certain countries first?
Yes, absolutely. That's happening as we speak. They've gone to India, their neighbor, also to China, a close ally, and also to Russia. All 3 countries are sending aid. Thailand is also going to be sending. Obviously, they're a neighbor. But we're at this interesting point in history where natural disasters and geopolitics tend to intersect quite intimately. Hence, it was no surprise to me that they call on China and Russia first. Both countries are their biggest sellers of military equipment to the junta. And also both countries are very, very in big competition for the country's natural resources and to lay pipelines across the north of the country for energy security.
Gosh, it does feel with so many of the discussions we're having at the moment that there's always a backdrop of resources and infrastructure advantage. And look, what are some of the barriers involved to getting aid into the country from what you've experienced before?
Right. Yeah, well, sure. Of course, we have the barriers created by Mother Nature, right? The destroyed roads, the collapsed bridges, The infrastructure to begin with was not very good. And there's also talk of possibility of some dams being heavily damaged and could collapse. And of course, we remember what happened in Ukraine when the Kakhovka Dam collapsed after Russian bombing. It destroyed huge amounts of the agricultural land there. And then on top of that, you have a huge insurgency going on. And we're reading today that despite the earthquake and the country on its knees, the junta is still bombing opposition forces. Somehow they found the aircraft, yes, and the fuel to do that. That's according to one of your sister networks reporting, verified already. So, and then you have the access. So whether the junta will allow the Americans and the Canadians, because they have a lot of experience in disaster relief, and also whether the UN entities who are best prepared to handle this are able to access areas controlled by the opposition, because normally they only work with government entities. That's the way it happens. So they'll have to take a decision on whether they can start working with what's called non-state actors. We'll see whether that happens. It's just almost a perfect storm of conditions right now that make saving lives and recovery very, very difficult.
And Michael, what about the role of the United States in a disaster like this? In the past, is this something that America would normally be on the quite front foot offering help? Have the cuts to the aid budget in America, are they affecting this?
Yes, absolutely. It's already happening. And this is the first big natural disaster that has happened in the aftermath of the dismantling of USAID by Donald Trump and his MAGA gang. The previously USAID provided a big chunk of support aid money to Myanmar. That is now gone. And let's not forget that they were also funding big organizations like WFP and UNICEF. So the UNICEF spokesperson yesterday actually said that their Myanmar appeal is very, very underfunded. And you find that across the world right now. Now, the Americans have offered to come in and help. They haven't said how much, but you've got to think to yourself, with so many people laid off or kicked out of USAID, it's going to be hard to put teams together. I'm not so sure the Trump administration would also send military assets to that part of the world, to a country that is very closely allied with China and Russia.
Well, look, Michael, we really appreciate your time. Really good to get your analysis, particularly as you know the lay of the land, having worked out there yourself. Thanks very much for talking to us. That's Michael Bociurkiw, who is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and former lead spokesperson for UNICEF during the Cyclone Nargis disaster in Myanmar. Gosh, what a terrible, terrible situation there.
เนี่ยแผ่นดินไหวเหรอวะดูไฟระเบิดมันระเบิดแล้วอะยืนอยู่นึกว่าหน้ามืดเมื่อกี้ผมก็นึกว่าหน้ามืดเฮ้ยกูเป็นไรวะยังมันจะถล่มแล้วน่ะมันจะหลุดแล้วน่ะจะล่วงแล้วโอเคนั่นนะครับไปแล้วล่วงแล้วพี่เอ้ยทั้งตึกเลยสัตว์เอ้ยตึกสตง.ที่ปป.อ่ะแล้วคนเป็นไรเปล่าวะเหี้ยคนงานบานเลยเชี่ยแล้วตายไม่ทันเราก็ไม่นึกนะตึกสตง.นะครับเกิดการสั่นไหวแล้วก็ถล่มลงมาวันนี้วันที่28 มีนา2568เวลาบ่ายโมง28 นาทีนะครับถล่มมาหมดแล้วทั้งตึกเลย